Okay, so for index match, the first thing I want to talk about is visualizing data that's categorical. Okay, so for this, I am going to now you may have less tabs than me because some of mine are like where I was prepping. So find the one that says patients. And actually patient bins is the better one because that's where we took all the index match stuff out. So if you have your patient bins data. All right. We're going to start by looking at categories in data for one variable. So we're going to look at education. So some of this will be hopefully at this point something you're starting to feel a little more comfortable with. At this point, the first part of this is something we've done now multiple times, and that's a pivot table. So if you were to do a pivot table on education, how do you start? You go up here to B, where education is, and select the whole column. We're going to go to insert, and the very first one, pivot table. Right? So click on pivot table. Most of what's in here is fine the way it is, including a new worksheet. So let's go ahead and put this in a new worksheet. Now, once you get this, we get this screen on the right, sorry, this like interface on the right, pivot table fields. If you didn't get that, you want to go up to the pivot table tools tab and go to the one that has analyze in it and go over to the show and toggle the buttons or the field list. I think it's the field list, yeah. Okay, so once you're there, we're going to take education, we're going to bring it down to rows. We're going to just drag it down. Notice now I have all the rows in my, all the categories in that variable education showed up here as rows. So now what do? Does anyone know how to build the pivot table out from this? Who remembers what to do next? You drag it down and it gave us the count. So I automatically did that for us. Okay, so now that we're here, we want to go ahead and visualize this. Now we have a table. That's great. That's helpful. It's giving us the counts. Notice, though, that if we wanted to think about college, highest level of education, remember, these are patients at a doctor's office, and we want to look at the highest level of college education. Normally you go, these are actually ordinal. It's an ordinal variable. It's not nominal. It's categorical, but an ordinal because there's a certain amount of education you have to achieve to get to the next one up, right? So high school really should come first in this list. So the way we're going to do that is you select the cell that has high school, hover around until you can get a four-pointed star, a four-pointed arrow. Once you have that, click and drag it up above college and let go. So now I just moved high school up. All right, did you guys see how I did that? Let's try it with some college. Some college should come between high school and college degree. So hover until you get a four-pointed star, click and drag. So now they're in the right order. Now that we have that, we have the counts. Do you guys remember what we also frequently do with a categorical variable besides a frequency table? There's something that's a lot like it. It's called the relative frequency table. Does that ring a bell? Relative frequency table is when you get the percentage that each number is of the total. All right, it's a little more helpful. So we're going to take education, and what we're going to do with education now is we're going to drag it again. So if I drag this down, I now notice I have two columns that have the same numbers in them. All right, does anyone remember how we convert that count to a percentage? We're going to go in here to where the values are over here in the bottom right, and we're going to click that drop down and click value field settings. Once you click value field settings, you'll get this interface. And then we're going to say show values as. Notice it says no calculation because it's just adding them up. What we're going to want to do is hit percentage of grand total. And then we'll hit OK. So notice that now we have another column in our data table that's got the relative frequency. Let's change those. Let's format that. We're going to go to the home tab, and I'm going to remove one of the decimals. I think I'll remove two. I'm just going to do whole decimals. All right. So now I want to start graphing these, but I don't want to use the pivot table to do it. So I'm going to first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this data into its own little table. And so for that, we're just going to select it. So select that whole table and copy it. And down below, this is that key technique I keep teaching you over and over. Paste special, paste just the values. All right. Now we need to fix this table because the pivot table has sort of these weird default column headings. The first one that says row labels, we're going to say this is the education variable. The next one over is frequency. And the next one over is relative frequency. Okay. Now I'm going to put a border around I'm going to put a box around the whole thing. So I'm going to go to the border button and select outside borders. Then I'm going to put a line underneath the columns by selecting bottom border. And I'm going to do that again under graduate. So it starts to look like a little bit like a table like that. You can play around with this for a while. I'm going to put a right border on the first column. Okay, and I'm going to center everything. So I'm selecting the table and I'm centering. And nothing here is written in stone as right or wrong. This is stylistic. It's kind of like whatever you feel makes it look easier to read. I'm going to change my relative frequencies to percents though, because everybody expects that. All right. So again, you can do this. I'm just showing you some little different formatting tools. You can shade, you can do different things. The main thing I want you to get at is that this is now removed from being connected to the pivot table. So now we just have numbers here and I'm going to select. Notice that I'm selecting the education and frequency column variable names and just the data. I'm ignoring the grand total at the bottom. We're going to go to insert and go to column. And right in here, I'm going to pick the first one, which is clustered column. And notice it automatically was nice enough to give the y-axis as the title of the chart. Sometimes it'll do that. And it's got each of the bars shaded with the height from the numbers here. Now, if I actually want my chart to show me so I don't have to kind of squint my eyes and guess what those numbers are, I'm going to go to this plus. If you're on a Windows, you can hit the green plus. If you're on a Mac, you're going to have to go up to add chart element in the upper left corner and come down to data labels. And then you can decide where you want them. Outside end is usually a nice spot. The other thing on the chart element or the green plus is to add an axis title. And I'm going to use this little right arrow key to choose the primary horizontal. And down here, I'm going to write education. Okay. So now we're getting a breakdown of these patients at this doctor's office on what their education, highest education level is. All right. Frequently, no pun intended, frequency tables, we want them as relative frequency tables. So what I really want to do is get this table to be relative frequency. So one way I can do that, there's many ways to do this. I'm just going to show you another one, one way, one of many. I'm going to select education, and then I'm going to hold down my control key or your command key and hit relative frequency. So now I've selected these two little blocks of data, and I'm going to do the same graph. I'm going to say insert graph, and I'll insert that graph. Notice now I can put it over here next to it. Well, okay, I will put it next to it and scroll over a little bit. Okay, so we're going to add the same thing here. Let's add these percentages in here with the data labels. All right, so now you can see exactly how many values were in your data set, which is also is important, but also what percentage of your data. Okay, so that's how we visualize with a bar chart our frequency and relative frequency for one categorical variable. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is how do we visualize one numerical variable? And for that, we usually use a histogram. So we're going to go back over to that patient data, that patient bins data. And let's say we want to visualize, I don't know, none of these are really good ones. Let's say we're going to visualize heights. So I select the height column. You guys have already done this, I believe. This one's really easy. It's the same steps that we did for a box plot. You select the data, you go to insert, you go to that middle one, but this time we actually use the histogram button. And you should have something like this. You can move this. So I'm working and I can go ahead and move this chart using the move chart button, or you can cut and paste it. But you want to put it over where we were working a second ago. So I'm gonna show you the move chart button by going object in, and it was sheet 4. Sometimes this doesn't work. I don't know why. Let me see if it's over here on sheet 4. Okay, good, it is. If you don't see it, it might be at the very, very, very bottom of your sheet. And so I have this chart. I'm going to make it smaller. I'm scrolling down. I'm moving it somewhere new. And this was heights, right? So let me put this heights data in here, heights. All right. So what I want to show you is how to, now notice, before I show you how to change the bins, let's compare a bar chart and a histogram. So notice the bar chart has space between the columns, right? The histogram, there's no space between the columns. And part of the reason why is if you look at the cutoffs on the bins, it took the number line and it's cutting it off so it has a right inclusive. Remember we talked about this whole right inclusive thing? So that the number 1.564 is in the first bin, and anything even slightly bigger than 1.564 is in the second bin. So we've now created a histogram of our heights. And what I want to show you is how to modify your histogram. You can actually see very different patterns when you change the number of bins. And sometimes you just have to play around with it a little to kind of see what is the ideal number of bins. Somewhere between 15 and 20 is usually the rule of thumb. So for this, how do we change this? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 right now. So the way we do it is on the bottom of the histogram are these bins. We're going to select those. Now, if you're in a Mac, you can two-finger right click and hit Format Axis. I right click and go down to Format Axis. If you do not see that, oh, actually this won't work on a Mac. You have to go up to Format, and on Format, come over here and choose the drop down arrow. This is for a Mac only. You're going to choose Series. And on Series, you're going to find the something where it talks about bins. It's going to look a little different than mine. It's a drop down, select number of bins. So if you're on a Windows laptop, it's going to look like mine. I wish I had another projector where I could project the Mac so you guys could see it, you know, different ways. But okay, so in here, select here where it says 8. Okay, let's change that to 12 so you can see how it starts to look a little different. Now change that to 20. It starts to look a lot different. And now let's just for fun change it to 40. So you start getting this crazy like spread of data. And what happens is you get to a point where you really lose any value in it because you're not able to see any kind of grouping or trend. Too little is like, let's say we did 4. You don't really know what's going on. You know, so you kind of want to understand the distribution of your data, and sometimes different numbers of bins give you different information. So you play around with it a little to see what if you're seeing a trend in your data. I'm going to go with 12 for this one. Kind of tells me that the data looks like trimodal in a sense. There's the low, there's the people who tend to be short, medium, or tall. It looks like there's 3 groups all included here. In this data, there's no gender, so no sex, excuse me. I can't differentiate this between male and female. So that probably is mixing this up, but I can't really see 2 groups exactly in here either. And this might be artificial data, I think, on some of this stuff. I'm really not happy with the people at Connect. They told me all their data was real, and it's not. So, okay. All right, so now we've talked about how to visualize one numerical variable. All right, now we're going to switch and talk about showing relationships between two variables. Okay. So the first one we're going to talk about is a contingency table. Remember when we have two categorical variables? And that's where we put the counts. We have the two categorical variables, maybe hair color, number of cars in your house. And you know, fill in the numbers. That's a contingency table. Then if we convert those, remember we did this in 210 when you get the totals and we get the percentage out of the grand total and the percentage in each row. And we talked about the marginals. We talked about that being the empirical distribution. And the empirical distribution is where you talk about the frequency, the probabilities for any one of those cells is just the relative frequency for that cell. So let's go ahead and set that up using Excel. All right, so I'm going to be using the index match data again. Going back over here to patients bins, I'm going to look at the first two columns, race and education. So I'm going to select A1, and I'm going to, again, we're going to build this with a pivot table. The pivot table is very, very powerful in Excel. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down using the right scroll bar. It'll help me go quicker to the bottom of my data. And I'm going to select A1 to B401. And now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go to insert. And same thing, pivot table. And I'm going to put that in a new worksheet. Might as well keep things clean here. All right, now this is where you start to see the real power of a pivot table. So far, it's helped figure out counts for categorical variables. Okay, now it's going to be able to do contingency tables for us on the fly. So all you're going to do is put one of these in the rows. I'm going to put race in the rows and put the education in the columns. Okay. Now, the order for race isn't really that, there's no order to race, so we're not going to order that. But up here in education, we're going to order this. So we're going to play the same game we did before, or maybe we want high school. We're going to find that 4-pointed arrow. And once I get it, I'm going to hit shift and drag high school over. And then some college, I'm going to go next. Okay. So I just set up my columns in the order I wanted, just like we did a second ago when we were playing with this one before. Now I'm going to, because there's both, I'm going to assume this is clean data. There's nothing missing. So I can use both race. There's the same number of data for race as there is for education. So I can use either one. It's going to count how many of each there are. So I can pick either one of these and I can show you because we'll get both, we'll get the same response. I can bring race down and it's going to give me the count of race that the number of rows that fits both the columns for the number of education and broken down by race. So you can see the totals over here. All right, notice if I grabbed education instead and I bring it down, under this category high school, I get the exact same numbers. That's what I was just getting ready to tell you. That's kind of a way to confirm that you have clean data, that you have no missing data, because it doesn't matter which one I got the exact same numbers. Okay, and I don't need all that repeated, so I'm just going to get rid of it. So I'm going to grab, oops, I'm going to grab that count of education and get rid of it. All right. So now that we set this up, we're going to do the same thing we just got done doing. We're going to create a copy of this. So I'm going to copy this down. I'm going to select it, copy, and paste below, paste special, so that I have my table. I'm going to format my table a little bit by changing row labels to the word race. I'm going to add the word education here. Okay, let's put a box around this whole thing. So I'm going to go up to the borders, I'm going to, instead of picking the all borders, I'm going to pick outside borders. Okay. Under the categories for education, I'm going to, well, actually, let's just center all this. Okay. Let's take education and select all the columns to the right, the cells to the right of education, and we'll hit this merge and center. Let's go ahead and put a border underneath those categories. So I'm going to click the borders and hit the very top one, bottom border. I'm going to do the same thing down here to separate the grand total. And then I'm going to put a border, a right border for my race categories. All right. I guess I could have done bottom border there too. Okay. Now this whole part right here, you can play around with this, making it look however you want. You can, make it as fancy as the one above it, or just leave it like this. At some point, you just say, okay, enough. I want to create now a graph from this. Now, what I want to do when I create this graph is I don't want to select the grand total. I'm just going to select the data inside. I'm leaving off the last column and the bottom row. All right, I just want to get the actual counts of the cells themselves. When I select that, I'm going to go to up here to insert, and we're going to go to that same option that we did a second ago. And I'm going to show you first the side-by-side columns. So this is showing us the breakdown of college by each of the races in the patients at this clinic. Now, if you want to go to chart element, I guess go to data labels and come here and you can hit the data labels and we can see the actual counts that will come from this table. Okay, so here we can do on the chart title is we can say education by race. Maybe, and on the, we can add, you can go up here to chart element, add axis titles, primary vertical, we would say frequency. All right. And we don't really need one on the x-axis. If it's self-explanatory, you don't need to clutter things up unnecessarily. Okay. So now, we can also do the same exact graph. So we can select that same data and go back up here to insert and that same selection. But this time I want you to do a stacked column. So a stacked column gives you the same information, but all the numbers are stacked on top of each other. Okay, so I'm going to put these next to each other so you can kind of see them. I'm going to make them a little smaller. All right, so that's just another way to see the data. Depending on what you want to see, you may think one is easier to read for a particular reason than another. Another one that is often used is what's called a 100% stacked column. So I'll show you a third one, and that is where we select the same data. We're going to go up here to insert, and we're going to go to that one, but now we're going to pick the third option. The third option is going to convert our numbers, and we're going to be able to see the percentage. It's going to still give us the numbers, but it's showing you by the amount that the bar is, how much of each one of these categories we have. Okay. And so you can kind of get a relative feel percentage wise, but it sometimes, instead of doing this, it might make more sense to have those actually be percentages. All right. So what I'm going to do, rather than add a whole bunch more columns to my pivot table, is I'm just going to go up to my pivot table That's already up here. I'm going to now change it to be percentages. So I can come down here and where count of race was, I'm going to select that, go to value field settings. Now we're going to show value as. Now this is where it can be really tricky because these percentages, if we give the probability, we can say percentage of grand total. And those percentages are each of those numbers divided by 400. So that's, and I'm going to get rid of one of the decimals. Oops. So each one of the numbers from this contingency table divided by 400 is the relative probability. That's what we call the empirical probability table for this data. That's the proportion of the data that represents. But we can also change this in case that we want to actually know for within each race what percentage went to college or what was the education level. So to do that, we go to the same thing, value field settings, but in the show value as where it says percentage of grand total, we're going to go to percentage. And if you look at this, we want row total. And if we say that, you'll get 100% in your row totals. And you see your percentages. I'm going to actually get rid of one more decimal here. So we get our percentages for each group, broken down by race, how many, what their highest level of college is. Okay, so now let's go ahead and copy that, and we're going to make a table from that. And it's a good idea here to go ahead and copy the grand totals because it reminds you that those percentages are for the rows. So we're going to copy that, bring that down. Maybe we can come down a little bit, give ourselves a little space and print just the numbers again. All right, now if we went through all this trouble of formatting this, by the way, we can select this table, right click, hit that paintbrush, the format paintbrush, and we're going to come down here and format this whole thing using that. Oops, that didn't work. Hold on. Oh, I have to add education first. And I need to change row labels to say race. All right, now that I did that, I can copy this formatting over. All right, and I'm going to switch everything over to percentages. Okay. Okay, so now that I have that, I can go ahead and come in here and question. The paintbrush on a Mac. Who knows how to use the paintbrush on a Mac?
You would just like highlight it, and at the home, just that little brush to the right of the face to leave the small one.
Yeah.
You would just select like what you would want it to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so now I'm going to go and make a similar graph to what we did above, but I'm going to do it with this data here. And so at this point, hopefully you're good with this. You can do this. Go insert and go into the bar chart. And maybe you want to select the stacked one. So now we've selected the stacked one. We'll give that data label. So now we see the percentages instead of numbers. Now, once you select this data, you may say, okay, but I actually want to know about, I want to know this the other way around. I want to know if I look at high school, if I look at people whose highest degree is like a college degree, what percentage of those, of all these patients, remember these are patients from a doctor's office, are of what race? So I could say, well, I can go up here and you can see up in the design tab, there's a switch row and column. So if I switch the row and column, I've now switched this, but this is actually false. If I add up these numbers, they don't necessarily add up to 100%. It didn't change the numbers on me. All right, because these numbers come from a pivot table. So you have to be really, really careful not to mess this up. This is actually, that was actually a false graph. This is the right graph because these percentages are row totals The 100% is by race. And that's why I have race, I have bars stacked to race. So let's say if I want it the other way, I'm going to go up here. I'm going to go to my pivot table. I'm going to go to my value field settings, and I'm going to switch this from percentage of row total. Now notice that these numbers at the bottom on this pivot table, they're like 24, 26, 28. Now I want the percentage that each race is of each education. So I'm going to do percentage of column total. So watch how those numbers change when we hit percentage of column total and we hit OK. So notice all those numbers changed. All right, so now what we want to do is graph that. So to graph that, I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to copy, come down and paste. Oops, I did a mistake. Paste special. Paste special. I don't want that to be a pivot table. Then I'm going to select this right here, and I'm going to copy my top 2 rows. And then I'm going to select the whole table and copy the formatting by hitting this paintbrush and selecting that paintbrush. Okay, so now notice the numbers are very different because now this is the percentage for each column. And now if I want to make this graph, I do the same thing again. I select that data, insert, go to that bar chart, select that third one, the stacked bar chart. But now this is wrong because these are percentage by total. So now in here is where I hit switch row and column. And now I can add the data labels in here, and they will now be right. They will match these columns. And so this is the percentage of race by education. All right, so let me put these next to each other so you can see the difference between them. All right, so here you can see this has got high school, some college, college, and graduate, and it's showing you the percentage of the patients at this doctor's office that have that as their highest degree of education out of the number that are in that category. Okay, so that's a very different way to see the same thing. Okay, so now we've kind of nuclear bombed, if you will. We've done all these different variations on how to view 2 categorical variables using contingency tables and different variations of bar charts. The next thing I want to show you is going to be how to view 2 numerical variables. So for 2 numerical variables, we're going to look at the correlation data, which if you don't have it on your laptop is in that data module on Brightspace. So I'm going to look at the correlation data. We're going to go to the technical sales reps data worksheet. We want to compare, we go to the top. I actually want you guys to set this up because there's too much data in here. This I think might be real data. I'm not 100% sure, I'm hoping, but it's too much data and the graph ends up being like a big cloud. So I want you to make a smaller version of it. So we're going to pick A1 and then come down to row 201. We're just going to make we're going to just take the first 200 records in this data. So we're going to come over here to 201. It's a little number 5. Oops, I should have hit shift click and I got to go back up. Shift click at A1. Okay, so we got that data, copy it into a new worksheet. So we want to do a scatter plot. We're going to look at age and salary. So I'm going to select age and then I hit my control key or command key and come over and hit salary. You see how I selected those 2 columns? Now I'm going to go to insert and come down to the bubble graph and choose bubble graph. All right, so you can see in here, there seems to be a little bit of a trend of salary. So let's change this and say salary by age. All right, and we'll add in here to the axes, titles. We're going to say salary here. And on the next one over here, we'll put age. Okay. Notice salary should be dollars. So I'm going to go over here to salary, select salaries, go to the home tab and hit the dollar sign. It's going to automatically change it in my data and in my graph. So that's nice. Excel did that for us. On this salary by age graph, I can kind of do a couple things. I'm going to select it. Now, if you guys remember, we can run correlations on this. But on the graph itself, we can come to the design tab, go to add chart element, come down to trend line and select a linear trend line. That trend line to me is hard to see kind of, so I'm going to select it, right click on it and hit format trend line. And then come over to the paint bucket. And on the paint bucket on the width, I'm going to come in here and put 4. And then on the color, I'm going to change it to something I think is more visible, like red. So now you can see the trend line. It's not a huge slope, but there seems to be a little bit of something going on. Okay, so this is not only how we check for correlations being legitimate, but it's in general how we compare two variables, two numerical variables. Okay. All right, so hopefully that gives you some stuff to play with and work with, and I'll see you on Thursday.